I refused to give my son $250,000. The next morning, my daughter-in-law, Zinnia, knocked on my office door with that sweet smile I'd grown to love over the years. "I brought you something special," she said, setting down a steaming coffee cup on my desk. "You seemed so stressed yesterday." The coffee had a strange metallic taste. Within minutes, my vision started blurring. I was supposed to be leading the biggest client meeting of our company's history in 20 minutes, but suddenly I couldn't think straight. That's when I realized what was happening. My own family was drugging me. But here's what Zinnia didn't know. I'd been expecting something like this for months. You see, I'd already discovered they'd been stealing from our family business. $400,000 gone through fake consulting companies they'd created behind my back. I'm Henry Vaughn, 62 years old, and I built Covenant Industries from nothing into a multi-million-dollar company. I thought I was building a legacy for my family. Instead, I was funding their betrayal. But before I tell you how I turned the tables on them completely, I want to know, have you ever had someone you trusted completely stab you in the back? Drop a comment and let me know your story. And if you want to hear more real-life justice stories like this one, make sure to hit that subscribe button because this is just getting started. The coffee tasted wrong. Metallic, sharp, like pennies left in rain. My daughter-in-law, Zinnia, smiled as she handed it to me during the most important business meeting of my career, insisting it was specially made just for me. The room began to blur around the edges. My son Vigo watched from across the conference table, his eyes cold in a way I'd never seen before. Our biggest client, Blackstone Partners, shifted uncomfortably as I stumbled over basic words. But here's what they didn't know. I had been expecting this exact moment for 3 months. My name is Henry Vaughn. I'm 62 years old, and I built Covenant Industries from nothing into a $4.2 million company. That morning, I discovered my own family had been stealing from me. By evening, I would destroy them completely. 30 years ago, I started Covenant Industries in my garage. My hands were raw from working construction during the day and building prototype machinery at night. The calluses on my palms told the story of every rivet, every weld, every dream hammered into reality. I made myself a promise that cold February morning when my first equipment order came through. My newborn son, Vigo, was sleeping in his crib upstairs. I swore I'd build something that would last generations, something that would never let my family struggle like I had. The company grew slowly at first. 1 contract, then 2. By Vigo's 5th birthday, we had 12 employees and our own warehouse. By his 10th, we were bidding on million-dollar projects. I worked 18-hour days because every dollar meant security for my family. I thought that dedication would mean something. I thought it would create loyalty, respect, gratitude. I believed my son would see the sacrifice and understand what it meant to build something with your bare hands. I imagined him learning the business from the ground up, earning every promotion, appreciating every client relationship I'd spent decades nurturing. But there's a difference between building a legacy and building entitlement. I should have recognized that difference sooner. Should have seen the signs when Vigo joined the company 5 years ago. Instead, I saw what I wanted to see, a son ready to carry on the family tradition. But there was something about Vigo that I never expected to discover. Vigo Vaughn graduated summa cum laude from Northwestern's business school. The day he walked across that stage, my chest swelled with pride so intense it physically hurt. This was my son. Brilliant, educated, ready to take everything I'd built to the next level. His first day at Covenant Industries, he wore a sharp navy suit and carried himself with quiet confidence. The other employees noticed immediately. "He has your determination," our production manager told me, "but with modern training." Those early months were everything I'd dreamed of. Vigo absorbed information like a sponge, asking intelligent questions about client relationships, operational efficiency, market positioning. He worked late without complaint, arrived early without being asked. During our weekly father-son dinners, we'd discuss strategy and vision. "I want to modernize our approach," he'd say, eyes bright with ambition. We could expand into government contracts, maybe even international markets. And I loved these conversations. Finally, someone who understood the business as more than just a paycheck. Someone who could see the potential I'd always known was there. But success has a way of changing people. Or maybe it just reveals who they really were all along. The respect that seemed so genuine in those first months began to shift. Subtle at first, interrupting my explanations to clients, making decisions without consultation, treating my experience like outdated thinking. Still, I told myself it was normal. Growing pains, a young man finding his confidence. But there was something about Vigo that I had never suspected. 2 years after Vigo joined the company, he married Zinnia Walsh. She was elegant, soft-spoken, with a master's degree in accounting from DePaul. During family dinners, she'd compliment my cooking and ask thoughtful questions about the business. "You've built something remarkable," she'd tell me, her voice warm with apparent admiration. "Vigo is so lucky to learn from someone with your experience." When Vigo suggested bringing Zinnia on as our chief financial officer, it seemed like a perfect fit. We needed someone with her credentials, and keeping it in the family felt right, traditional, the way business used to be done. Her first few months were impressive. Zinnia reorganized our accounting systems, implemented new tracking software, streamlined our billing processes. Clients started getting invoices faster, payments came in more efficiently, the books looked cleaner than they'd ever looked. "She's a real asset," I told Vigo during one of our morning coffee meetings. "You chose well." He smiled that confident smile I was seeing more often. "She is pretty amazing, isn't she? We make a good team." I agreed completely. Watching them work together gave me hope that the company would thrive under their eventual leadership. They seemed to complement each other perfectly. His vision, her precision. But Zinnia wasn't as simple as she appeared to be. I began noticing small things. The way she'd exchange glances with Vigo during meetings when I was speaking. How she'd gently redirect conversations away from certain topics. Little moments that made my stomach tighten with unease. Something was happening that I couldn't quite identify yet. When our biggest competitor went bankrupt, I saw an opportunity that could change everything. Their client list included government contracts worth $2.1 million annually. Their equipment could be purchased at auction for a fraction of its value, but the expansion would require significant investment. I liquidated my personal savings account, took out a second mortgage on the house, converted my retirement portfolio into cash. Every financial move carried enormous risk, but the potential return was too valuable to ignore. "This is our chance to become a major player," I told Vigo and Zinnia during an emergency board meeting. "We'll triple our revenue within 18 months. Vigo's eyes lit up with excitement. "The timing is perfect. Their clients are already frustrated with the bankruptcy delays. We can step in and provide immediate solutions." Zinnia ran the numbers on her laptop, her fingers flying across the keyboard. "The math works," she said after 10 minutes of calculations. "Aggressive, but manageable if we execute properly." That's when I made the decision that would later save everything I'd built. I transferred full operational control to Vigo, making him president and CEO. But I also established Meridian Holdings as a separate entity, moving 70% of our core assets into that structure. On paper, Vigo and Zinnia were running the company. In reality, they were managing what amounted to the operating arm of a larger organization. I told myself it was just smart business planning, asset protection, estate planning. But somehow, deep in my gut, I knew I'd need that insurance policy. I had no idea how right I was. While Vigo and Zinnia focused on day-to-day operations, I quietly built a comprehensive monitoring system. Not because I didn't trust them, but because 40 years in business had taught me that the most dangerous problems are the ones you can't see coming. I installed discrete recording equipment in the conference room and main office areas. Nothing illegal, just audio monitoring in common spaces, which was perfectly within my rights as the building owner. I also implemented backup accounting software that tracked every transaction in real time. Just covering our bases, I told myself. Due diligence. The Meridian holding structure was more sophisticated than anyone realized. Every major asset, the building, the primary equipment, the master client contracts, remained under my direct control. Covenant Industries operated under license agreements that could be revoked with 30 days' notice. Vigo and Zinnia had the authority to run the business, but not to sell it or fundamentally alter it without my written consent. I kept these arrangements to myself. Why complicate their management with bureaucratic details? They had enough responsibility learning to lead a rapidly expanding company. Besides, everything seemed to be going well. Revenue was increasing, clients were happy. The expansion was proceeding ahead of schedule. But late at night, when I reviewed the daily reports, small inconsistencies began appearing in the financial data. Nothing dramatic, just numbers that didn't quite align with my expectations. At first, I attributed these discrepancies to growing pains. New systems, increased volume, learning curves. They didn't know that I was still watching everything, and thank God I was. The first real warning sign appeared 6 months after the expansion. I was reviewing the quarterly reports when I noticed expense categories that didn't match my memory of approved expenditures. Sterling Consultants had received payments totaling $23,000 for operational analysis. I'd never heard of Sterling Consultants. I'd never approved any operational analysis. When I asked Zinnia about it during our monthly financial review, she didn't miss a beat. "Oh, that's the efficiency consulting firm Vigo found," she said, pulling up a file on her laptop. "They're helping us optimize the new workflows. Very impressive credentials." Her explanation was smooth, professional, completely reasonable, but something in her tone made my throat tighten. Too rehearsed, too ready. I started paying closer attention to our vendor relationships. Sterling Consultants appeared again the following month, then twice more. Always for vague consulting services, always in amounts just under $25,000, the threshold that required board approval. Meanwhile, Vigo began making comments about my involvement in daily operations. "Dad, you don't need to micromanage every detail," he'd say when I asked questions about new contracts. "Zinnia and I have everything under control." "Maybe it's time for you to enjoy semi-retirement," Zinnia would add with that gentle smile. "You've earned the right to step back a little." They weren't wrong. I was 62 years old. I'd been working 18-hour days for 3 decades. Maybe I should trust them more. But the numbers kept bothering me. Something about those consulting payments felt wrong in my bones. The moments that meant everything to me were becoming fewer and farther between. Vigo used to seek my advice on complex negotiations, value my insights on client relationships, respect my institutional knowledge. Now he seemed irritated when I offered input. "We've got this handled, Dad," became his standard response to my suggestions. "The business has evolved since your day." Since my day, as if 30 years of building relationships and reputation had suddenly become irrelevant. As if the foundation I'd laid was somehow obsolete. During family dinners, the conversation increasingly focused on modernizing the company. Zinnia would enthusiastically discuss new software systems and automated processes that could reduce overhead. Vigo talked about leveraging digital platforms to scale more efficiently. I found myself feeling like a guest at my own table. "Your father built something amazing," Zinnia would say that to Vigo, her voice warm but somehow patronizing. "Now it's time to take it to the next level." I wanted to support their vision. Truly, every parent wants to see their children surpass their achievements. But there was something hollow about their enthusiasm, something that felt more like ambition than respect. The warmth I'd once felt from both of them was being replaced by polite distance, professional courtesy instead of family connection. Late at night, I'd sit in my home office and wonder if I was imagining things. Maybe this was just what business succession looked like. Maybe my discomfort was just an old man's reluctance to let go. But behind those smiles and reassurances, something else was growing. Something I was about to discover. The Sterling Consultants' payments weren't the only irregularity. As I dug deeper into our financial records, a pattern emerged that made my stomach drop. Equipment rental fees to Apex Solutions, a company I'd never heard of, totaling $31,000 over 4 months. Software licensing payments to TechFlow Innovations for programs we'd never implemented. Professional development expenses for seminars that no one had attended. Each payment was structured to stay below our approval thresholds. Each had documentation that looked legitimate at first glance. But when I called the phone numbers listed for these vendors, I reached disconnected lines or automated services that went nowhere. My hands were shaking when I ran a comprehensive search on Sterling Consultants through our business database subscription. The company existed, all right, incorporated in Delaware 6 months after Vigo joined Covenant Industries. The registered agent was Zinnia Walsh Vaughn. I sat in my car in the parking lot, staring at the printout, feeling like the ground had shifted beneath me. My chest felt tight, my breathing shallow. This wasn't a mistake or oversight. This was theft. My own family was stealing from the company I'd built for them. The total amount became clear after 3 hours of forensic accounting. Over the past 18 months, fake consulting fees, equipment rentals, and professional services had drained $127,000 from our operating accounts. But even that wasn't the complete picture. As I traced the money flows more carefully, I realized this was just what I could identify from the obvious patterns. The real number had to be much higher. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I sat at my kitchen table with every financial document I could find, building a complete picture of what had been taken from us. The sophisticated theft scheme involved 7 different shell companies, all registered to various combinations of Vigo and Zinnia's names and addresses. Sterling Consultants was just the most active. The others, Apex Solutions, TechFlow Innovations, Strategic Business Partners, Mountain View Analytics, Pacific Coast Consulting, and Riverside Management Group, had all received payments for services never rendered. By dawn, I had calculated the total loss, $400,000. $400,000, stolen systematically over 18 months by my own son and daughter-in-law. Money that should have been reinvested in equipment, used for employee bonuses, or saved for the company's future. My throat felt raw, like I'd been screaming, though I'd sat in complete silence all night. But the financial theft wasn't what hurt most. It was the realization that every smile, every family dinner, every conversation about our shared vision had been a performance. While I'd been trusting them with the legacy I'd spent my life building, they'd been calculating how much they could take without getting caught. The next morning, I called Vigo and asked him to come to the office for a meeting. Just the 3 of us. No agenda, I told him. Just wanted to discuss some expansion opportunities. What I really wanted was to give them one last chance to tell me the truth, to see if there was anything left of the family I thought I knew. That decision would change everything. The meeting was scheduled for 10 o'clock on a Tuesday morning. Vigo arrived 5 minutes early, wearing his usual confident smile and carrying a leather portfolio that made him look every inch the successful executive. Zinnia joined us a few minutes later, dressed in a sharp business suit, her hair perfectly styled, radiating the kind of professional competence that had impressed me so much when we first met. "Good morning, Dad," Vigo said, settling into the chair across from my desk. "What's on your mind?" I opened the folder I'd prepared and slid a single sheet of paper across the table. It was a summary of the Sterling Consultants payments, dates, amounts, and the Delaware Incorporation documents showing Zinnia as the registered agent. "I need you to explain this," I said, keeping my voice steady. Zinnia's face didn't change expression, but I saw her fingers tighten slightly around her coffee cup. Vigo leaned forward to examine the document, his brow furrowing in apparent confusion. "I'm not sure what you're suggesting," he said after a long moment. "I'm not suggesting anything. I'm asking for an explanation of why our company has paid over $50,000 to a consulting firm that my daughter-in-law secretly owns." The silence that followed lasted maybe 15 seconds, but it felt like an hour. I watched their faces carefully, looking for any sign of remorse, surprise, or guilt. Instead, I saw a calculation. "Dad," Vigo finally said, his tone shifting to something I'd never heard before, cold and patronizing. "I think you might be confused about some things." That's when I realized who they really were. Confused? The word hit me like a physical blow. About my own company's financial records? Zinnia leaned forward with what looked like genuine concern. Henry, we've been worried about you. Some of your recent decisions have been inconsistent. And what decisions? Well, Vigo said, exchanging a look with his wife, last month you approved the Blackstone contract expansion, then forgot about it entirely. And you've been asking the same questions about our quarterly projections multiple times. None of that was true. I remembered every contract, every conversation, every decision I'd made. But they were delivering these lies with such confident sincerity that for a moment I doubted my own memory. The Sterling Consultants' payments are legitimate business expenses, Zinnia continued. We discussed them with you several times. Maybe you should consider taking a step back from day-to-day operations. My hands were shaking with rage, but I forced my voice to remain calm. Show me the contracts. Show me the work product we received for that $50,000. Dad, you're embarrassing yourself, Vigo said. This kind of paranoid thinking, it's not healthy for someone your age. Someone my age. As if being 62 years old automatically made me senile, incompetent, unfit to run the company I'd built with my own hands. As if 3 decades of experience counted for nothing compared to their modern business degrees and polished presentations. I stood up slowly, my legs feeling unsteady beneath me. I want you to think very carefully about what happens next, I said quietly, but I could see in their eyes that they'd already decided. They thought they'd won. 3 days later, Vigo called to schedule another meeting. His tone was different this time, more formal, businesslike, almost apologetic. I think we got off on the wrong foot, he said. Maybe we can find a solution that works for everyone. When I arrived at the office, I found them waiting with a detailed presentation about expansion opportunities that would require a significant capital injection. We need $250,000 to move forward with the government contracts, Vigo explained, clicking through PowerPoint slides filled with projected revenue numbers and market analysis. It's a game-changer opportunity. $250,000 on top of the $400,000 they had already stolen. The return on investment is incredible, Zinnia added, her voice warm and persuasive. Within 2 years, this injection could triple our annual revenue. I listened to their entire presentation without interrupting, watched their confident smiles, their polished delivery, their apparent certainty that I would hand over $250,000 to fund whatever scheme they were running. When they finished, the room fell silent. They sat there expectantly, waiting for my response. No, I said simply. Vigo's smile faltered. Dad, I don't think you understand the scope of this opportunity. I understand perfectly. The answer is no. That's when their masks finally slipped completely. You stubborn old fool, Vigo snapped, his voice sharp with frustration. You're going to sabotage everything we've worked for because you can't stand the idea of not being in control. For the first time, I was seeing their true faces, and I wasn't the only one. The Blackstone Partners meeting was scheduled for the following Thursday at 2 o'clock. Our biggest client, representing $3.2 million in annual revenue, was coming to discuss expanding their contract with us. It should have been a celebration. Instead, Vigo took control of the scheduling and preparation without consulting me. I'll handle the presentation, he told me on Wednesday. You can certainly attend, but I think it's better if I take the lead on this one. When I asked about the agenda he'd prepared, his response was dismissive. Standard stuff, Dad. Nothing you need to worry about. About my data? The casual condescension in his voice made my jaw clench, but I kept my expression neutral. Of course, I'll be there. That night, I tested the recording equipment I'd installed months earlier. Every device was functioning perfectly, with clear audio pickup throughout the conference room. I also activated the backup recording system on my phone and placed it strategically in my jacket pocket. Something told me I was going to need evidence of whatever they had planned. Thursday morning, I arrived at the office early and went through my normal routine. Checked emails, reviewed client files, prepared talking points for the meeting. Everything felt surreal, like going through the motions of a life that was about to end. At 1:45, I heard Zinnia's footsteps in the hallway. She knocked on my door frame, holding a small tray with 2 coffee cups. "I brought you something special," she said with that gentle smile I'd once found so endearing. The coffee smelled different than usual, stronger, with an underlying chemical scent that reminded me of the prescription sleep aids my doctor had given me after my wife's funeral. I had no idea they were willing to go this far. Zinnia set the coffee cup down on my desk with careful precision, her fingers lingering on the handle for just a moment too long. "I added a little something extra," she said, her voice warm with apparent thoughtfulness. "You've seemed so stressed lately. I thought you might appreciate a more relaxing blend." The way she emphasized relaxing sent a chill down my spine. I picked up the cup and brought it close to my face, inhaling the aroma. Beneath the familiar coffee scent was something medicinal, sharp, chemical. "That's very thoughtful of you," I said, maintaining eye contact. "What kind of blend is it?" "Oh, just some herbs I picked up at the health food store. Chamomile, lavender, a few other natural stress relievers. Nothing too exotic." Well, she was lying with such smooth confidence that I almost admired her skill. Almost. "The Blackstone representatives should be here any minute," she continued. "Vigo is setting up in the conference room. Are you ready?" I nodded and stood up, carrying the coffee cup with me. As we walked down the hallway, I could feel Zinnia watching me carefully, waiting for me to drink. In the conference room, Vigo was arranging papers at the head of the table. He looked up when we entered, and I caught the quick glance that passed between him and his wife. They were both watching me now, waiting. The Blackstone team arrived exactly on time. 3 executives in expensive suits, briefcases full of contracts and expansion plans. Important people whose opinion could make or break our company's future. Perfect witnesses for whatever humiliation they had planned. I took a seat at the table and raised the coffee cup to my lips. But I'd learned a few things during my 2 years in the military 40 years ago. One of them was how to recognize when someone was trying to drug you. As I brought the cup to my mouth, I pretended to take a sip, while actually letting the liquid barely touch my lips. The taste was wrong, bitter with a metallic edge that had nothing to do with coffee beans. When Zinnia looked away for a moment to greet the Blackstone executives, I quickly switched my cup with the one she'd brought for herself. The movement was subtle, practiced, something I'd learned to do in situations where trust was a luxury you couldn't afford. "Gentlemen, welcome," Vigo said, standing to shake hands with our clients. "I think you'll be very excited about the proposals we've prepared." I watched Zinnia settle into her chair and reach for what she thought was her own coffee cup. She took a long sip, then frowned slightly, as if the taste wasn't what she'd expected. The meeting began with standard pleasantries and overview presentations. I participated normally, asking relevant questions, providing background on our company's capabilities. To any outside observer, I was functioning exactly as expected, but I could see the confusion growing on Vigo and Zinnia's faces as the minutes passed. I wasn't becoming drowsy or confused. I wasn't stumbling over words or losing track of the conversation. Meanwhile, Zinnia was beginning to look pale. She'd stopped talking and was pressing her fingers against her temples as if fighting a headache. "Everything all right, Mrs. Vaughn?" one of the Blackstone executives asked. "Just a little tired," she mumbled, her words slightly slurred. That's when Vigo realized something had gone wrong with their plan. I watched my son's face carefully as he processed what was happening. The confusion, then the growing panic as he realized their scheme was failing. But Vigo had committed to this course of action, and he wasn't backing down. "Dad," he said, his voice taking on a tone of artificial concern, "you seem a little off today. Maybe you should let me handle the rest of this presentation." "I feel fine," I replied calmly. "Please, continue." "Are you sure?" Zinnia asked, though her own voice was becoming increasingly unsteady. "You look confused." The Blackstone executives were beginning to notice the strange dynamic in the room. I could see them exchanging glances, their professional smiles becoming more forced. That's when Vigo made his move. "Gentlemen, I need to be frank with you," he said, turning to address our clients directly. "My father has been showing signs of cognitive decline recently, Memory lapses, confusion about basic business operations, difficulty following complex discussions. And the words hit me like physical blows, each one delivered with calculated cruelty in front of the most important clients our company had. We've been trying to manage the transition gradually, Vigo continued, but I think it's becoming clear that he's no longer capable of handling executive responsibilities. One of the executives shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Another glanced at me with what looked like sympathy. I understand this is awkward, Vigo said, but I wanted you to hear it from me directly, rather than wondering about our company's leadership stability. My own son was publicly destroying my reputation to steal my company, and he was doing it while I was supposed to be drugged and helpless. But every word was being recorded. Dad's been asking the same questions repeatedly, Vigo continued, his performance becoming more convincing with each lie. Yesterday, he forgot about a contract we'd discussed just hours before, when I sat perfectly still, letting him build his case. Every false statement, every manufactured concern, every calculated betrayal was being captured by the recording devices I'd installed throughout the room. We love him, of course, Zinnia added, though she was now gripping the table edge to steady herself. But the company needs stable leadership. The Blackstone executives looked increasingly uncomfortable. This wasn't the professional meeting they'd expected. They were witnessing what appeared to be a family intervention disguised as a business presentation. Perhaps, said their senior representative, we should reschedule this discussion for another time. No need, I said quietly. I think I've heard enough. I stood up slowly, reached into my jacket pocket, and placed my phone on the table. The recording app was clearly visible on the screen, showing 47 minutes of active recording time. The room went completely silent. 47 minutes, I said, my voice steady and clear. 47 minutes of you attempting to humiliate me in front of our most important clients. 47 minutes of lies about my mental capacity. 47 minutes of you trying to steal my company. Vigo's face had gone pale. Zinnia was staring at the phone like it was a poisonous snake. And of course, I continued, there's also the matter of the $400,000 you've embezzled over the past 18 months. The Blackstone executives were now completely focused, their business instincts telling them they were witnessing something significant, something that would change everything. I don't know what you're talking about, Vigo said, but his voice lacked conviction. The confident executive persona he'd worn for months was cracking like cheap paint. I reached into my briefcase and pulled out a thick folder of documents, bank statements, incorporation papers, canceled checks, email printouts, the complete evidence of their theft operation. Sterling Consultants, Apex Solutions, TechFlow Innovations, I read from the top sheet. 7 different shell companies all registered to various combinations of your names. $400,000 in fake consulting fees and equipment rentals. Zinnia tried to stand up but swayed dangerously. The drugs she'd intended for me were working exactly as planned, on her. The FBI takes financial fraud very seriously, I continued, my voice never rising above a conversational tone, especially when it involves family businesses and amounts exceeding $250,000. You can't prove anything, Vigo snapped, but he was looking around the room like a trapped animal. Actually, I can prove everything. Bank records, digital trails, witness statements. Plus, of course, this recording of you attempting to discredit me while under the influence of whatever Zinnia put in that coffee. The senior Blackstone executive cleared his throat. Mr. Vaughn, we should probably conclude this meeting. Of course, I said. Gentlemen, thank you for your time. I'll be in touch soon to discuss our continuing relationship under new management. As they gathered their materials and headed for the door, I could see them processing what they'd witnessed. They weren't just leaving a failed business meeting, they were leaving a crime scene, and now I had witnesses to everything. That night, I made the phone call that would end this forever. I sat alone in my office until well past midnight, staring at the documents spread across my desk. Bank statements, incorporation papers, email printouts. The complete story of my family's betrayal laid out in black and white. The silence in the building was absolute. No humming computers, no distant traffic, no sounds of life or activity. Just me and the evidence of everything I'd lost. On my desk was a framed photograph from Vigo's college graduation. The three of us, me, Vigo, and Zinnia, smiling in front of Northwestern's campus. My arm around my son's shoulders, both of us beaming with pride and possibility. Zinnia looked radiant in her graduation dress, holding her own diploma from the previous year. I remembered that day perfectly. The weather had been beautiful, sunny but not too warm. We'd celebrated at an expensive steakhouse, talking about the future, about family, about the legacy we were going to build together. How had we gotten from there to here? My chest felt hollow, like something had been carved out of me with surgical precision. This wasn't just business fraud. This was the systematic destruction of everything I'd believed about my family, my relationships, my life's work. I'd spent 30 years building Covenant Industries not just as a company, but as a foundation for my family's future. Every late night, every difficult client, every financial risk had been justified by the belief that I was creating something meaningful for the people I loved most. But love, apparently, had never been part of their equation. The realization hit me like a physical blow. I had to choose between being a father and protecting everything I'd built. And for the first time in my life, I knew that protecting myself had to come first. Tomorrow, everything would change. I pulled out my phone and dialed a number I'd hoped never to use. Thomas Chen was the best financial crimes attorney in Chicago, and he worked nights because white-collar fraud never slept. Tom, it's Henry Vaughn from Covenant Industries. I need to see you first thing in the morning. Henry, it's past midnight. What's going on? My son and daughter-in-law have been embezzling money from my company. I have evidence. I need to know my options. There was a long pause. How much money are we talking about? $400,000. Possibly more. Jesus, are you certain about this? I looked down at the papers scattered across my desk. Bank records showing payments to non-existent companies, incorporation documents with forged signatures, email chains discussing consulting services that had never been performed. I'm certain. I have bank records, recordings, digital evidence, everything. Bring it all to my office at 7 tomorrow morning. Don't talk to anyone else about this until we've had a chance to review everything together. After hanging up, I activated the secure laptop I kept for sensitive business. The Meridian holding structure I'd established months earlier was about to become the most important decision of my life. With a few keystrokes, I began the process of transferring operational control of all major assets out of Covenant Industries and into Meridian. The building lease, equipment financing agreements, primary client contracts, everything that actually mattered. By the time Vigo and Zinnia arrived at work tomorrow morning, they'd be managing the shell of a company with no real assets and no financial resources. But they wouldn't know that immediately. I wanted them to think they'd won, just long enough for me to put the final pieces in place. By noon tomorrow, they'd discover exactly how wrong they'd been. At 5:30 a.m., I was already dressed and heading to my car. The manila envelope containing 47 pages of evidence sat on my passenger seat like a bomb waiting to explode. Thomas Chen's office occupied the top floor of a downtown high-rise. By 7:15, we were seated at his conference table, documents spread between us like pieces of a puzzle that formed a picture neither of us wanted to see. This is ironclad, he said after reviewing the bank statements. Federal prosecution guidelines require referral to the FBI for any business fraud exceeding $250,000. With this much documentation, they'll almost certainly pursue charges. What kind of charges? Wire fraud? Conspiracy? Potentially money laundering, depending on how sophisticated their shell company structure is. Your son could be looking at 3 to 5 years in federal prison. The words hit me harder than I'd expected. 3 to 5 years. My son, in federal prison because of evidence I was providing. There's something else, Tom continued. The attempted drugging incident yesterday. That's assault. Possibly attempted poisoning, depending on what substances they used. I'd brought the coffee cup with me, sealed in a plastic bag. Can you have this tested? Absolutely. If it contains controlled substances or dangerous concentrations of over-the-counter medications, that's additional criminal exposure. We spent 2 hours building a comprehensive legal strategy, File criminal complaints with both local police and the FBI. Freeze all Covenant Industries accounts pending investigation. Execute the Meridian Holdings asset transfers immediately to protect company resources. How long will this take? I asked. Criminal investigation, 6 to 12 months. But we can take immediate civil action to protect your assets and prevent further theft. As I signed the paperwork authorizing him to proceed, I realized there was no going back. By this afternoon, my family would be facing federal investigators, and I would be free. The FBI's Chicago Financial Crimes Unit operates out of a nondescript office building on West Roosevelt Road. Agent Patricia Williams was a 20-year veteran with gray hair and intelligent eyes that missed nothing. Mr. Vaughn, we've reviewed the materials your attorney provided. This appears to be a substantial case of business fraud. She opened a thick folder on her desk. $400,000 over 18 months. Sophisticated shell company structure, forged documents. And yesterday's incident with the suspected drugging adds an element of violence that concerns us. What happens next? We'll execute search warrants today for all business premises and personal residences, seize computers, financial records, communications devices, interview witnesses, including the Blackstone Partners representatives who observed yesterday's meeting. My stomach tightened. When? Within 2 hours. We move quickly on cases like this to prevent evidence destruction. Agent Williams leaned forward. I have to ask, are you prepared for the personal consequences of this investigation? Your son and daughter-in-law will be arrested probably today. There will be media coverage. Your business relationships will be scrutinized. I thought about Vigo's confident smile as he'd publicly humiliated me yesterday. The casual way Zinnia had drugged my coffee, expecting me to become incoherent in front of our most important clients. They made their choice, I said quietly. I'm just making mine. All right. We'll need you available for additional interviews as the investigation proceeds. And Mr. Vaughn, you did the right thing. Family or not, theft is theft. Driving back to the office, I felt lighter than I had in months. For the first time since discovering their betrayal, I wasn't carrying the burden alone. Justice was coming. I arrived at Covenant Industries at 9:30 a.m., my usual time. Vigo and Zinnia were already in the conference room, apparently having a heated discussion in low voices. When they saw me, the conversation stopped abruptly. Good morning, I said pleasantly. How are we feeling today? Zinnia looked pale and shaky, obviously still recovering from accidentally drugging herself. Vigo seemed on edge, constantly checking his phone and avoiding eye contact. Dad, about yesterday, he began. Water under the bridge, I interrupted. Misunderstandings happen. Family arguments happen. What matters is moving forward. I could see the relief in their faces. They thought my calm demeanor meant I was backing down, accepting their version of events, maybe even agreeing to the retirement they'd tried to force on me. Actually, I continued, I've been doing some thinking about what you said, about stepping back, letting the younger generation take the lead. Vigo's eyes lit up with barely concealed excitement. Really? Really. And in fact, I've prepared some documents that should formalize the transition. I placed a manila envelope on the table between them. Everything you need to know about the new management structure. Zinnia reached for the envelope with trembling fingers. As she opened it and began reading, I watched her face change from hopeful anticipation to confusion to growing alarm. These are asset transfer documents, she said slowly. Everything's been moved to Meridian Holdings? My backup company, I explained calmly, established 6 months ago. As of this morning, Meridian Holdings owns the building, the equipment, the client contracts, and the operating capital. Vigo grabbed the papers from his wife's hands. What the hell does this mean? It means you're fired, I said quietly. That's when we heard the sirens. The FBI arrived with 5 vehicles and 12 agents. I watched from the conference room window as they surrounded the building, their movements precise and professional. Henry Vaughn, Agent Williams appeared in our doorway, badge visible, voice calm but authoritative. We have warrants to search these premises and arrest Vigo Vaughn and Zinnia Vaughn on charges of wire fraud and conspiracy. Vigo stood up so fast his chair toppled over. "This is insane. Dad, tell them this is some kind of mistake." But I wasn't looking at him anymore. I was watching Agent Williams and her team work with the efficiency of people who did this every day. Computer towers being disconnected, file cabinets being emptied, evidence bags being labeled and sealed. "Vigo Vaughn, you have the right to remain silent." The Miranda rights echoed in the conference room where we'd had so many family business meetings, where I'd taught him about client relationships and operational efficiency, where he'd smiled at me just yesterday while trying to destroy my reputation. Zinnia was crying now, mascara running down her cheeks in black streams. "This isn't what we wanted. It wasn't supposed to go this far." "What did you want?" I asked her quietly. We thought you'd retire eventually, that the company would become ours naturally. We needed the money for our own plans, our own investments." "So you stole from me." "It wasn't stealing. It was advancing our inheritance." As they led my son away in handcuffs, he looked back at me with an expression I'd never seen before. Not anger or defiance, but something like recognition. For the first time, he was seeing me as someone other than a pushover father he could manipulate. He was seeing me as an opponent who had outplayed him completely. I called Blackstone Partners that afternoon. Their senior representative, James Morrison, answered on the first ring. "Mr. Vaughn, we heard about the FBI investigation on the news. Are you all right?" "I'm fine, James. I wanted to personally assure you that Covenant Industries will continue operating without interruption under new management." There was a pause. "To be honest, Henry, after yesterday's meeting, we were concerned about the company's leadership stability. Vigo seemed unstable." "Vigo is no longer with the company. Neither is Zinnia. I've resumed full operational control." "Thank God," Morrison said, and I could hear the relief in his voice. "Between you and me, we've been uncomfortable with some of their decisions over the past few months. Too aggressive, too willing to cut corners. We trust you, Henry. We always have." Over the next hour, I made similar calls to our other major clients. The response was consistent. Relief that I was back in charge, concern about Vigo and Zinnia's judgment, and strong commitments to continuing our business relationships. By evening, I had secured written confirmation that $4.1 million in annual contracts would transfer to Meridian Holdings. Vigo and Zinnia hadn't just lost their freedom, they'd lost the business they'd tried so hard to steal. The irony was perfect. In trying to push me out, they'd eliminated themselves completely. That night, I sat in my home office and made a list of everything that needed to be done. Hire new financial staff. Restructure operations under the Meridian banner. Rebuild the business culture they'd corrupted with their cynicism and greed. For the first time in months, I felt hopeful about the future. But there was one more call I had to make. I didn't call Vigo's lawyer. I didn't visit him in jail. I didn't send money for his defense fund. Instead, I focused on cleaning up the mess he and Zinnia had made of my company. The next 2 weeks were a blur of legal meetings, client calls, and operational restructuring. I hired Sarah Mitchell, a forensic accountant, to trace every dollar that had been stolen and ensure we'd identified all of their schemes. There were actually 9 shell companies, not 7, she reported during our final meeting. Total losses are closer to $430,000. I also hired Marcus Webb, a former FBI agent who specialized in corporate security. His job was to implement safeguards that would prevent anyone from ever stealing from me again. "The good news," Marcus said, "is that your Meridian Holdings structure is bulletproof. Even if they hadn't been caught, they couldn't have touched your core assets." The media coverage was brutal but brief. Local business owner exposes family embezzlement scheme ran in the Chicago Tribune for one day, then disappeared beneath newer scandals and fresher tragedies. Our clients barely noticed the transition. If anything, they seemed more confident in our stability once I was clearly back in charge. But the hardest part wasn't rebuilding the business. It was rebuilding my life without the family I'd thought I had. My house felt enormous and empty. The extra place settings I'd automatically arranged for Sunday dinners sat unused in the cabinet. The guest room that Vigo and Zinnia had sometimes used for overnight stays gathered dust. I was successful, financially secure, legally vindicated, and completely alone. 3 months later, I got a letter from prison. I handed my office keys to the security guard and walked through Covenant Industries one last time. The building would remain under Meridian Holdings ownership, but I was leasing it to a packaging company that needed the warehouse space. There was something therapeutic about leaving that place behind. Too many memories, too much history contaminated by betrayal. Starting fresh in a new location felt like the right choice. My personal items fit into 2 cardboard boxes, some framed photos, a few books, the coffee mug my wife had given me for our 20th anniversary. Everything else, the expensive furniture, the awards and certificates, the corporate memorabilia, would stay with the building. The new Meridian Holdings office occupied the top floor of a renovated warehouse in River North. Modern, clean, efficient. No ghosts, no shadows of family disappointment haunting the hallways. I'd hired 6 new employees, all carefully vetted through background checks and reference investigations. No family members, no complex personal relationships, just competent professionals who understood that work was work and family was family. The first week in the new space was surprisingly peaceful. No tension-filled meetings, no subtle arguments disguised as strategic discussions, no feeling like I had to justify every decision to people who were secretly working against me. Just the clean satisfaction of running a business the way I wanted to run it. But late at night, when I locked up the office and headed home to my empty house, I couldn't escape the fact that everything I'd worked for had been designed to benefit people who no longer existed in my life. Success felt hollow when there was no one to share it with. Meridian Holdings grew quickly. Without the overhead of supporting Vigo and Zinnia's theft operation, our profit margins improved dramatically. Within 6 months, we'd added 3 new major clients and expanded our service offerings. I hired David Chen as my new operations manager. No relation to my attorney, just a coincidence of surnames. He was 35 years old, Vigo's age, with similar energy and ambition, but David had something Vigo had never possessed: integrity. You could double this operation within 2 years, he told me during a strategy meeting. The demand for our services is incredible. It was true. The business was thriving in ways it never had under Vigo's management. Clients trusted us more, employees worked harder, and the financial foundation was more solid than ever. But growth meant hiring more people, taking on more responsibility, working longer hours. At 62, I found myself asking whether I wanted to spend my remaining healthy years building something bigger, or just enjoying what I'd already accomplished. The answer surprised me. I wanted to build, not for family legacy or generational wealth, but for the pure satisfaction of creating something excellent. For the first time in my career, I was working entirely for myself, and it was liberating. Meanwhile, I monitored the legal proceedings against Vigo and Zinnia through periodic updates from Agent Williams. Their cases were proceeding through the federal court system with the inevitable momentum of bureaucratic justice. But I tried not to think about them too often, until the letter arrived. The letter came on a Tuesday morning, mixed in with the usual business correspondence. Federal Bureau of Prisons return address, Vigo's inmate number printed in the corner. I stared at the envelope for 10 minutes before opening it. The handwriting was unmistakably his, the same confident script he'd used to sign contracts and forge documents. But something about the words themselves was different. Smaller, more careful, less certain. "Dad," it began, "I know I have no right to contact you after what I did, but I needed you to know that I understand now what you built and what I destroyed." The letter was 4 pages long, written on standard prison stationery. No attempt to minimize his crimes or shift blame to circumstances or other people. Just a straightforward acknowledgement of his choices and their consequences. "I thought I was entitled to everything you'd worked for," he wrote. "I thought your success was somehow owed to me, rather than something I needed to earn. I was wrong about everything. The most painful paragraph came at the end. I realize now that I never really knew you. I saw you as an obstacle to what I wanted, not as a person who deserved respect and gratitude. I'm not asking for forgiveness because I don't deserve it. I just wanted you to know that prison has given me time to think, and I finally understand what I lost. I read the letter 3 times, then put it in my desk drawer. I didn't know how to respond, or if I should respond at all. Some damage couldn't be repaired with words. The trial coverage was minimal, a brief mention in the business section when they were sentenced. Vigo received 3 years in federal prison. Zinnia got 18 months and 3 years probation. The FBI had recovered $312,000 of the stolen money through asset seizures and bank account freezes. The remaining amount was considered a total loss, written off as the cost of their criminal education. Agent Williams called to inform me when the case was officially closed. Justice doesn't always feel satisfying, she said, but the system worked. They're paying for their crimes, and you've recovered most of your losses. Thank you for everything you did. Just doing our job. Take care of yourself, Mr. Vaughn. I hung up and sat quietly in my office, looking out at the Chicago skyline. 3 years had passed since I'd first discovered their theft. Meridian Holdings now employed 15 people and generated $6, $2 million in annual revenue. I was more successful than I'd ever been, but success felt different when achieved alone. That afternoon, I received a call from David Chen. Henry, there's someone here to see you, says it's personal. I expected a salesperson or maybe a former Covenant Industries client. Instead, I found Rebecca Morrison waiting in our reception area, James Morrison's daughter from Blackstone Partners, now working as an independent business consultant. Mr. Vaughn, I hope you don't mind me stopping by unannounced. I have a proposition that might interest you. At 58, Rebecca was elegant, intelligent, and according to David's research, recently divorced after a 20-year marriage to someone who turned out to be remarkably similar to Vigo in terms of financial ethics. I'm listening, I said. For the first time in years, I was curious about what someone else wanted to build. Rebecca's proposition was straightforward. A partnership between Meridian Holdings and her consulting firm to pursue government contracts that neither of us could handle independently. I have the relationships, she explained over coffee in my office. You have the operational capability. Together, we could bid on projects worth $20 million annually. It was a smart business idea, but I found myself more interested in the person presenting it than the proposal itself. Rebecca had the same sharp intelligence that had initially attracted me to Zinnia, but without the underlying calculation I'd learned to recognize. Why Meridian Holdings? I asked. You could partner with larger firms, companies with more resources. Because I've watched you rebuild this business from scratch, after your family tried to destroy it. That takes character. And character matters more than resources. We talked for 2 hours about business strategy, market opportunities, and risk management. But we also talked about rebuilding after betrayal, learning to trust again, and the challenge of starting over in your 60s. My ex-husband embezzled money from our joint accounts to fund a gambling addiction, she said. Not as sophisticated as your son's scheme, but just as devastating. I understand what it feels like to discover that someone you loved was stealing from you. When she left that afternoon, I realized I hadn't thought about Vigo or Zinnia once during our conversation. For the first time in years, I'd been focused entirely on the future instead of the past. That evening, I pulled Vigo's letter out of my desk drawer and read it again. Then I sat down to write a response. Not forgiveness exactly, but acknowledgement. Not reconciliation, but closure. Some bridges couldn't be rebuilt, but they could be properly finished. My letter to Vigo was shorter than his had been. Son, I received your letter and appreciate your honesty. You're right that you didn't really know me, but I'm realizing I didn't really know you either. We both made assumptions about each other that prevented us from having an authentic relationship. I'm not ready for forgiveness, and I may never be, but I don't carry anger anymore. What you and Zinnia did was criminal, and you're facing the consequences. What I did was protect myself, and I'm living with those consequences too. I hope prison gives you time to figure out who you want to be when you get out. I hope you use that time wisely. I won't be visiting or calling, but I wish you well. I mailed the letter that afternoon and felt something release in my chest. Not forgiveness, but finality. The story of my relationship with Vigo was complete, even if it hadn't ended the way either of us had hoped. 6 months later, Rebecca and I formalized our business partnership. Meridian Consulting Group combined our companies under joint ownership, creating one of the most successful mid-sized consulting firms in the Midwest. But more importantly, we'd become friends. Then something more than friends. Rebecca understood the specific pain of financial betrayal by someone you loved. She also understood the challenge of rebuilding trust when your judgment had been so thoroughly compromised. We moved slowly, carefully, with the caution of people who'd learned hard lessons about assumption and expectation. But we moved forward. A year after Vigo's release from prison, I received one more letter. This time, I threw it away unopened. Some conversations were over. Some chapters needed to stay closed. 3 years later, I'm 65 years old and happier than I've been since my wife died. Meridian Consulting Group employs 42 people and generates $12 million annually. Rebecca and I were married last spring in a small ceremony attended by our employees and her grown children. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if Vigo and Zinnia had simply asked for help instead of stealing from me. If they'd been honest about their financial pressures, their ambitions, their frustrations, we might have found solutions that didn't involve destroying our family. But I've learned that speculation about alternative histories is pointless. We all made the choices we made, and we all lived with the consequences. I still keep one item from the Old Covenant Industries office, a letter opener my wife gave me on our 10th anniversary. Silver-plated, engraved with my initials, elegant in its simplicity. Sometimes I hold that letter opener and remember what she used to tell me about difficult decisions. Henry, she'd say, love doesn't mean accepting abuse. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is protect yourself. She was right, of course. Setting boundaries isn't cruelty. Demanding honesty isn't selfishness. Protecting what you've built isn't greed. These days, when people ask me about the family business scandal, I tell them the truth. Sometimes the greatest act of love is refusing to enable someone's destructive behavior, even when that someone is your child. The company I built became the foundation for a life I never expected to have. The family I lost taught me lessons I never wanted to learn. Both were necessary. Both made me who I am today.